and gentlemen, especially those of you who are joining us from Jamaicans.com, on Facebook Live, Jamaicans.com, a wonderful Sunday evening to you. Welcome to another edition of Bar Talk. Today's edition is a serious but very thought-provoking one. And we have some guests in the room, and I'm just going to go straight to it right after we do our housekeeping. As you know, Bar Talk is brought to you by Moment2Remember Studio here in Sunrise, Florida, where we do everything from photo to video to print. And you can catch us on the web at www.facebook.com/M2R Photography. This show is hosted by none other than Jamaicans.com, the leading platform for Caribbean and Jamaican news. You can find Jamaicans.com on the web, on Facebook, www.facebook.com/ and it's One Love Jamaica. Thank you so much. So we are dealing with, we have some gentlemen here with us today. And last week, if you remember, we spoke about having young, the title of last week was Young, Gifted, and Black. And so that should have been what we talk about, young, progressive, professional men. And a lot of ladies that call me, yeah, let me tell you, who's going to be on the show? Well, they're here. But based on the occurrences of the last week or so, we have to change the mode and the tempo of the show. As you know, there's one, in every generation, there is a saying that kind of grips everybody in terms of injustice. In the generation past, Rodney King and his saying, can we all get along? Well, now suddenly this generation in the last week or so, the word is, I can't breathe. A black man on the ground with an officer and officers around him. And so we want to look at it. The topic for today, if vaccine is the cure for COVID-19, what is the cure for racism? And so we have a panel this evening that's going to discuss that. And I'll introduce them shortly. One other thing. As you know, Bar Talk and anything on Jamaicans.com is a interactive show. So just let us know two things. Where you're viewing this from, and say hi to us. Give a like to Jamaicans.com or Moment2Remember. Say hi to these guys if you know them. Don't tell us their secrets or anything, but just say hi. Okay, we'd like to do that. So let's start our show by introducing our guests. And so to my far left, let's start. To my far left is Dr. Bernard Ashby. Just give a little bit about yourself, where you're from, your background, and we'll move around. We get to know you a little bit as we continue.
Okay. Well, my name is, again, Dr. Bernard Ashby. I am born and raised down here in South Florida. So I'm a proud Florida boy. My mother's from St. Kitts, and my father's from Aruba. So I'm
He ain't no Florida boy. I'm sorry. Go ahead, folks.
I'm a first generation small island descendant, and I'm very proud of my heritage from that perspective. I went to college at Florida State, went to med school at Cornell, and did my training at Columbia and George Washington and Johns Hopkins before returning back home. I used to work at Mount Sinai in Miami Beach for a little while, but currently I opened up my own practice called Comprehensive Vascular Care. We have an office based in South Miami, and we have another one opening up in Port St. Lucie, and I'm happy to be home. And unfortunately, I wish this was under better circumstances.
Yes.
But I'm glad that I'm here, and I'm glad that my counterparts are here, because the reason why our predecessors marched was so that we could be right here talking to you right now in the position that we're in. So I'm looking forward to getting into it.
Awesome. And let's move to my right, Attorney Harold F. Pryor Jr.
Thank you for having me. First and foremost, thank you for sharing your platform. My name is Harold F. Pryor Jr. I'm a proud husband, proud father, also a proud attorney. I grew up in Florida. I am a proud Florida boy. I'm a fifth generation Floridian, but I do claim Jamaica by way of marriage. I am from Mandeville, as I tell people. So go Mandeville. I'm a proud attorney. I've been practicing law for almost 7 years. I served as a prosecutor for 3 years, where I tried cases ranging from misdemeanors all the way to attempted murder. And then I went into civil practice. And I also served as an in-house counsel for a multi-million-dollar telecommunications company where we managed multi-million-dollar deals that were sometimes twice or three times that the budget of certain state attorney's office throughout the state of Florida. I'm here because I'm passionate about this. Growing up, seeing the criminal justice system, I thought it didn't work for people who looked like me. Growing up black in America was a struggle. I had family members who were brutally murdered, and we watched those killers go free. But also I had family members who had mental health issues and drug addiction issues, and we saw the system treat them less than. And so I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm here because I truly believe that we have to have a criminal justice system that works for all people. I want a criminal justice system that promotes fairness, justice, and equality for all people. And we have to stand up against police brutality. Doesn't matter your race, color, or creed. And so I'm here. I'm looking forward to having this discussion with you all. And I look forward to coming up with solutions to the problem. Thank you.
Okay, folks, you've heard it from the first two. Some are not originally Caribbean or Jamaican, but they do have that blood running through their veins. Mayor Dale V.C. Holness should have been here this evening. However, based on what's going on the road, he might be popping in, he might be doing something else. As you know, we should have had some rallies, some demonstrations, and he's out there managing what happens. Last but by no least, and I call him the fake Jamaican, but I think you'll hear from his accent, is attorney Josiah Graham.
Good evening. My name is Josiah Graham. I am an attorney here in Broward County. I'm born and raised in Broward County in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, in a neighborhood called Melrose Park. I practice civil litigation, specifically catastrophic injury, wrongful death. I focus a lot on medical malpractice, a lot on products liability, and negligent security. Those are the type of cases I work on. Some of the cases include for example, some cases can include police brutality. So I wanted to come here and share my perspective on some of those cases as well. I am Jamaican. My parents are Jamaican, so I'm a yachty. You know, so I haven't been there in about 7 years, but you know, I think it's on the plans for this year at some point. But I'm here to share my perspective, and I'm glad that I'm here to be a part of the discussion. You know, interesting thing about me, you know, I was actually arrested as a juvenile in my neighborhood in Melrose Park. I went through the criminal justice system, experienced some type of some of the racism we're going to be talking about here, but I also experienced some good things. You know, I went through a diversion program through the state attorney's office in Broward County, and that was a good experience for me. 20 years later or 15 years later, I started working again at the state attorney's office, the same office that, you know, I got that diversion program through. And then I worked in the juvenile unit, in the county court unit, then in the felony court unit before leaving after about 2.5 years and joining a firm called Kelly Ustall, where we do products liability, catastrophic injury, and wrongful death. Awesome,
awesome. Funny, we have all things in common because for years I run a program called AMI Kids, or some people know it on the street as FOSI. And I've dealt with the juvenile part of this the system quite a while, from Howard Finkelstein to his second in command, Gordon Weeks. Gordon Weeks, I've done pictures for Gordon. Hey, Gordon, if you're watching, say hi. I've done, you know the folks. And so I appreciate the fact that I feel good. And that's what we should all feel good about. When somebody has been through the system, can rise above it and be successful. And so that's one of the things we want to talk about in terms of humanity, that it doesn't matter what, there's always a good in someone, and therefore we should seek to do that rather than try to just step on someone for whatever the deal is. The disclaimer for this show, two things about this show. The disclaimer is that we're not here to pick sides. We're not here, this is not about police brutality. This is about general injustice, whether it comes from a police, whether it comes from a caretaker in a nursing home, where it comes from anyone else. I just want to mention this evening that I cannot do this alone unless I have the cooperation of the gentleman who is my running, I call him my shotgun brother, Kevin Stew. Okay, Kevin Stew, and so he is, this evening is my co-host on the show. So Kevin, just say hi to the folks, let them know who you are, and so forth, and we go from there. All right. I'm going back to Mr. Pryor. Give us an update to what's happening on the street.
Yes, it's rather unfortunate what's going on, and we have to be here on this date, and we actually have to protest. We have a situation where recently where a gentleman by the name of George Floyd was killed or brutally killed in Minnesota. It was for uttering a forged instrument or presenting a $20 bill, a forged $20 bill, a counterfeit $20 bill. And he was accused of, right? And so you had law enforcement officers that apprehended him, and there was excessive use of force, and ultimately led to his death. And so now we're dealing with the situation where, which is common in the United States, is that you have these phone or cell phone recordings that are capturing these events. And but for those events being captured by the phone, none of us would know about any of this. And so we found out that this brother was killed. We saw it live, where a law enforcement officer was driving his knee into his neck or upper body area near his back, and we saw that he passed away. And we heard some words. His last words were "mama," calling for his mother and saying that "I can't breathe." We've heard that before. And so that has sparked an outrage throughout the country, rightfully so, throughout the country, throughout the world.
Yeah.
Right? And we've had protests throughout the world. We had a protest earlier today in London, actually.
Oh, wow.
There was a protest throughout the country, and now we're doing protests here in Broward County. And so just to give everyone an update here in Florida, where we live, where we're at right now in Broward County, Florida, there was a protest that was scheduled to take place in Lauderhill, Florida. It was known, and then I believe around 10 p.m., 11 o'clock last night, the Lauderhill City Commission, or the city of Lauderhill, issued a statement that they were canceling the protest. And so the protest was then moved to downtown Fort Lauderdale, where it's taking place right now as we speak. Me being an attorney who's practiced in the criminal law realm, I took it upon myself to say that if there are any protesters who are out there peacefully protest, and for any event, if they're being placed into custody for peacefully protesting, exercising, I feel, civil disobedience, their right? When we talk about through Dr. Martin Luther King or Henry David Thoreau, I am willing to represent those individuals pro bono. And there's been other great attorneys in the Broward County community that have decided to step up and do the same. And so that's where we are right now. And I think we as citizens, both black, white, brown, no matter your race, color, or creed, we're fed up about this. And you saw this with Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia, a young man who was just going for a run on a Sunday afternoon. He was killed, brutally killed, hunted down and killed. And then you have these events, and then before that, you had the sister, Breonna Taylor in Kentucky, who was just home asleep. She was an EMT, and the law enforcement officers went to the wrong address, and they brutally killed her, right? And so we've seen these string of events that happen, or these occurrences over the last 3, 4, 5, 6 months. And I think now the country is starting to wake up. I think everyone is looking at this, and they're saying enough is enough. People are protesting, and people are exercising, I believe, their basic human right to protest, to exercise civil disobedience. And so that's where we are right now in the world and locally.
Your take on it?
I mean, Harold pretty much summarized it very eloquently. People are fed up. People are tired. I think it was just a ticking time bomb. What happens is when you have, these systematic things happening over and over again. You have Eric Garner, who was choked out in New York. You have it captured on video. You have him saying, "I can't breathe." You have him saying that, and then a police officer who is not arrested, or who then is arrested and is not prosecuted. He's brought before the grand jury and is not ultimately charged. And now he's walking the streets free. You have people who are frustrated, people who are saying, you say that we should peacefully protest. You say that we should, do other things, and then they do it. Then they go and they kneel. You have people like Colin Kaepernick, who kneels, in the Super Bowl, or kneels at different, football events. And then you have the president, other people who calls him a son of a bitch. And so then what is your alternative? Then you have people who are very frustrated, then they're marching, and then you have some people who are doing looting and other things. And then I don't know. It's just, what do you want people to do? At what point do you say enough is enough? And I think people are at that point right now where they're saying enough is enough. We want to be here. We want to be heard. And this is how you were heard, I think. And I think that, the people who are marching, they're doing nothing differently than what Martin Luther King did. And then a lot of people always say, well, Martin Luther King did certain things and he didn't advocate for, certain type of protesting, but they forget that Martin Luther King was viciously murdered, like Martin Luther King,
and terrorized by the FBI.
And terrorized by the FBI. So you have a lot of people, so it's like, I don't understand what type of protesting some people would think is justified or reasonable, type of protesting. Obviously, I'm not, no one here is calling for burning down buildings or things of that nature. But when people are going out and vocalizing what they've been through and what they've seen their whole lives, and now that it's finally captured on video for the world to finally see, and then you have people, colleagues who are saying, wow, Josiah, Harold, Bernard, is this the type of stuff that you've experienced? Is this the type of things you've been seeing? Yeah, now you finally can see it. Now we have evidence, but even that evidence is not enough. It's not enough for other people, police officers, to arrest people. It's not enough for, district attorneys to make a stand. So what I call for is people to protest, but more than that, what else can we do? You have to find out the people that are in power who are making these decisions, right? So these people who are in power, the majority of people don't know who their state attorney is. Who don't know who their elected sheriff is, don't know who their judges are.
We're coming to that right away because I'm towards the end of the show, I'm gonna plug that in Harold's way.
Can I add one thing about Martin Luther King?
Yes, go ahead.
I think that was beautiful, man, because
yes.
I hate how people, when these occurrences happen, they always throw out a glossy Martin Luther King speech, right?
Yes.
But then there's one quote that stands out to me from Martin Luther King. He said that protest, right? Protest and rioting is the language or the voice of the unheard, right?
Voice of the unheard.
Voice of the unheard. And that's what we're experiencing now. I think like Josiah eloquently put that together. We are experiencing a time where it's just happening too frequently, for too long, and people are now speaking up and speaking out. And so it was bound to happen, and it's happening now. And now we have to figure out how we can move forward.
Funny. That's why I interject because I noticed when we put this flyer online, some guy, I don't remember because we put it through different groups and so forth. Some guy, I'm not, it's not of our color, but we're not going to have that as an issue here right now. But he essentially said that, I just lost my train of thought.
Commented on the post.
Commented on the post. And he said, part of our problem is because when we are stopped by the officers or stopped by the cops per se, that we don't comply. And he says, you can make an argument when you start to misbehave. You're a wrongfully injured lawyer. What's your point of that?
Well, I don't know how you can comply when someone's on your neck for 8.5 minutes, when 4 officers are on your back, and you're in handcuffs with your hands behind your back. I mean, how else can you comply in a situation like that? How can Eric Garner comply when he's being choked out by an officer and he's yelling out, "I can't breathe"? And I saw, I think, a district attorney somewhere say that, well, if he said he can't breathe, then he could obviously breathe. Oh. I mean, that's just a ridiculous statement to make in a time like this. I mean, that clearly is showing. We hear that all the time. If you just comply. Well, they haven't been in situations where you are complying, and that's just not enough. When the Breonna Taylor, when she's asleep, I mean, how can you comply when you're asleep in your own bed? When someone makes an unannounced, knock, no knock, warrant, kicks in your house. This is the wrong apartment. And then shoot, how could someone comply in a situation like that?
You can't even dignify a response.
I want to go to
go ahead.
Sure, you're gonna hear people say stuff like that, but it's ridiculous. It's nonsensical. But I mean, it's a shame that we have to respond to things like that.
Exactly.
But go ahead, Doctor.
I was waiting on that to clear that up so I can come to you that because there's so many things in that we talked about that people are saying. Well, for example, one is on his neck, and talking to you just before you said. You'll tell us best. That is not just his neck, but it was 4 men.
Well, three officers on top of this gentleman.
Take it up.
And so, you know, if you add up all the weight, it's at least 500 pounds of pressure on this man. And so, if you look at the autopsy, which concern was with the BS autopsy report commented on his pre-existing conditions. Mentioned that he had hypertensive heart disease and coronary artery disease. That was exacerbated by potential intoxication, which is conjecture at best. And then they mentioned the fact that obviously the pressure did not help. I thought the autopsy report essentially gave the cops a way out, essentially, because at the end of the day, if he was not...
It's working. Continue.
Oh, it's working, yeah.
Yeah, continue.
Yeah, all right. I'm gonna keep going. So you guys can hear me?
Yeah.
Are we on live? You guys can hear me?
Seems like we can't hear you now.
Yeah,
All right, excellent. So, so essentially this guy died because of police brutality, period, all right? He would be alive if the cops didn't all kneel on the back of his body, neck down to the legs, as he screamed that he couldn't breathe, as he screamed for his mom, as he slowly died. And, you know, what was really concerning and was the height of inhumanity was when he went unconscious. This gentleman went unconscious for almost 3 minutes, and they continued to apply pressure to this man and did not even bother to check whether or not he was breathing, whether or not he had a pulse, whether or not he was alive. And that right there was probably the most egregious part of the entire thing. I mean, obviously him breathing in agony, yelling in agony that he couldn't breathe was tough to watch. But then they let this man sit there unconscious and did not even attempt to treat him, although the onlookers told them to, and they didn't care. So essentially,
from a medical standpoint, what is the standard of care in a situation?
Yeah, I'm going to get to that. So they didn't care, right? And so they waited again almost 3 minutes after he went unresponsive to do anything. And what happened was when EMS arrived, one of the paramedics or EMTs came up and did some kind of BS pulse check. But when he came, he did not ask the officer to remove his knee from the back of this gentleman's neck. He did not bother asking for this guy to get some kind of relief. This guy was unresponsive. And so, in addition to allowing the officers to remain on this guy's neck, the EMS then proceeded to allow this man to remain unresponsive in handcuffs, and they did not protect his C-spine at all. And they put him in the gurney with zero urgency while he was unresponsive. Now, the standard of care in that circumstance would have been to provide basic life support, CPR. So you come, you see if somebody's responsive, you see if they're breathing, and you immediately start resuscitation efforts. Because at that point, he wasn't unresponsive for more than 2.5 minutes. So he was still salvageable at that point. They simply did their job, provided basic care. He would have had a chance in hell at resuscitation. So no one's talking about how the EMS, in addition to the police, dehumanized this man. They treated him worse than roadkill, essentially, because they did not provide basic life support. So at a minimum, your job is to, as an EMT or a paramedic, to assess the ABCs, airway, breathing, circulation. That was not done. And they casually picked him up, put him in a gurney, handcuffed, in the back of an ambulance with zero urgency. Later reports said that they ran CPR on him for an hour after he died. The time to do it was right then and there. Okay, time is not a part of it.
So let me get this clear. As a lay person, if a EMT person, regardless of who the person is, has the person in custody, your responsibility then is to make sure you give care. So would you suggest that at that time, even so, that EMT person needed to tell the officer,
yes,
get off him?
At a minimum.
At a minimum.
At a minimum.
All three officers.
At a minimum. Like that goes without saying. But the fact that they did not initiate CPR when they arrived was an egregious failure of their profession. Like that's license revoking a failure. Because this gentleman did not get basic life support. And so when people ask about the connection between COVID-19 and the disparity that exists and what's going on with this gentleman, George Floyd, what's going on with the gentleman George Floyd, there is a natural connection, essentially, because we call it healthcare disparities in healthcare, right? It's what what we're looking at right there was a healthcare disparity, meaning this gentleman got inferior care. He got no care. And that's exactly what happens with a lot of patients when they present to our healthcare system. They're not getting any care. So a lot of folks who had COVID-19 infections, they were getting turned away, they were not getting tested, they were going to inferior hospitals, getting inferior care. And, we call it healthcare disparities, but that's racism, okay? And EMS is an extension of the healthcare system, and you saw a visualization of the fact that this man's life did not matter to them. They did not care about his life, so they didn't even bother trying to save it.
So let me just take time out first of all, because we want to first of all thank you folks for hanging in there with us when we had some technical difficulties. We're still trying to sort through them, but I think you're having audio now, and that is a good thing. So we want to tell you thanks. We also want to recognize people who are watching us from all over the world. In the United States, we have Alma Richards is joining us from Georgia. We have Mitch McLean. Hey Mitch, how you doing? From West Palm Beach. We have Andrew Green. Hey, hello Luke. Hello everyone. Andrew Green from the UK. We have Madison is watching from Philadelphia. And Karen Lindsay says, hey everybody. Karen here, watching from London. Bless. Andrew Goldie, Dali, if that's the name, she's coming to us from London also. Happy Sunday from Ruth Irvin. We have Tanisha Nato coming to us. We have Tony Kelly. Not sure exactly where she's come from. She says, can I have the presenter email address? Kindly send to, and she gave me that. I am a diabetes ambassador from England. Okay, we'll do so. Carol Chan, we know you're here, you're watching. Juliet Duncan is also watching from Virginia. Melissa is watching. Hey, Melissa, thanks for communicating with us with what's going on with the audio and so forth. You know how these things go. You know, and anybody else, you know exactly how that goes. Pauline McLean is watching also. Andrew Dixon is watching. Denise Denise is watching. Sharon Bryan, Judy Rodriguez, Song Winter, thanks a lot. We got it back. Tanisha, a couple other people, audio, and we are back to Melissa. Awesome. Culpable negligence. Somebody put that up there. Anyone of you guys want to take that? On the part of whom does that? The EMT or the part of all of them?
That's the question.
Yes, so all of them.
That's the question.
So all of them. So at the, we could talk about like I think. We can all agree that the gentleman was murdered by the police in that situation. But in terms of negligence, it's a separate argument because it happened, the negligent part actually occurred, actually it's not a separate argument because there was negligence at multiple levels, but in terms of medical care, the police are first responders. And so they're obligated.
So let's bring it down to the layman level.
Oh, I'm sorry. So they're first responders. So when they see someone in distress, or someone who's in like needs medical attention, they have basic life support skills. So all police officers are BLS certified, meaning they're certified in basic life support. So if someone is not breathing, they don't have circulation, they're unresponsive, they're taught to check the airway, breathing, circulation, provide CPR if and when necessary.
Yes.
They did not do that.
Wow.
It didn't happen. Right? And again, it didn't happen at all within that video clip at any point. And so the police didn't do it, EMS didn't do it.
From a medical point of view, how ridiculously long are 8 minutes?
Oh, it's an eternity. It's an eternity. And so that's why I keep framing it in terms of after he went unresponsive. Because, before that, they were kneeling on this gentleman as he agonized. But once he went unresponsive, no one cared. No one cared. And that was beyond egregious because me as a medical professional saying, hey, all right, if he was resisting or not, at that point, he's not a threat to you, just unresponsive. He's a human being. What do you do then? And they said to him, nothing. His life did not matter to them. They didn't care. And then there was an extension of that from the police to the EMS where the EMS came in and treated him inhumanely as well. They did not do their job at all. And this happens all day, every day in the hospitals. And police officers can tell you, my sister's in NYPD, by the way, and she explained to me that sometimes she has to advocate for people she brings into the hospital because the staff treats them as inferior as well. Because they come in as quote-unquote criminals, they treat them as such, and they get inferior care. And she has to say, listen, like, this is a person, regardless of the circumstances by which they present for care. But we do it all the time. The healthcare system has owned biases, and again, we call them healthcare disparities, but it's racism.
Exactly. Moving to Mr. Pryor, you are running for an elected position here in Broward County.
Yes.
This is not a show where we view candidates or we air candidates. That's not about it. But as an attorney, as someone seeking to do stuff for your community, how, like the show says, vaccine was the cure for COVID, or supposedly the cure. What's the cure? What's an approach for racism here?
You know, that's a great question. You know, I grew up in Florida, like I said earlier. I'm a fifth generation Floridian. And I come from a long lineage of family members who protested racial issues in this country, and racism in this country, and in the Deep South and throughout the state of Florida. And, you know, I came from a very pessimistic viewpoint in my family where it was, you know, there was no change. There was going to be no change because of the gross inequities that they experienced throughout their lifetime. Having separate facilities. You have the government telling you separate, but it has to be equal. But we later learned that separate was inherently unequal. I still believe that there can be a cure for racism. I truly believe that racism is a disease. Racism is a disease that kills all forms of compassion and empathy that one can have for another person. Racism is a disease as such that it would allow a white man in Georgia and his son to look at a black man who's running, going for a jog in the neighborhood, just to feel the cool Georgia breeze hit his face, see him as a black man running in their neighborhood, as opposed to as just as a young man going for a Sunday afternoon jog. Racism is a disease, and I think it's something that can be cured. And I think how we cure that is creating practices in our country where we institute implicit and racial training and bias training into not only just in law enforcement, not just in state attorneys and prosecutors' offices throughout the country and even the world, right? But I think we need to incorporate implicit and racial bias training in our everyday practices, in our social institutions, in our school curriculums, in the Fortune 500 companies. I think if we start early and create this racial diversity training and train people on the differences and the different backgrounds that people may have, I think that could be one way that we can combat this. But I remain optimistic. I think that we can do it, but we have to have people willing to partake in this, right? It can't just be black people or people of African descent, you know, just protesting and saying we want our rights. We need our allies, our white brothers and sisters, people that are in position and authority to actually step in and want to be involved, who want to buy in, who want to fix this wretched condition of racism. And I think we can do it, but I also think that we have to have leaders at the forefront that can speak out about this. And I truly believe that I am one of those leaders. And I think we need to do that. Voting is important. I don't care whatever walk of life or whatever part of the world that you're in. If you're here in Florida, voting is important. If you're here across the pond, voting is important as well, right? So we have to vote on the local level, but also on the national level. And positions like state attorney, positions like judge, those affect our everyday lives. Positions like sheriff affect our everyday lives. And we have to put people in those offices that understand that we need to change. And my last point, because I'm a little long-winded, I am. But you know, we have to have leaders in office that understand, especially in the criminal justice system. When you talk about criminal justice in the United States, I'm talking the United States as a whole, not just as the South, or someone being a Southerner from the South. When you talk about the criminal justice system, you have to acknowledge that we have a criminal justice system in this country that has been traditionally stacked against people of color and poor people.
Yep.
If you cannot acknowledge that, you shouldn't be sitting in those positions and you shouldn't be leading any office. We need leaders that understand that and that acknowledge that and that are willing to stand up and say enough is enough.
And Harold brings up an interesting point about how we can change that within the criminal justice system, how we can change that by electing the proper sheriffs, state attorneys. But aside from all that, how we can fix or what's the cure, what you asked. Having our white counterparts acknowledge certain biases, right? So for example, I had a friend reach out to me and say, Josiah, wow, I realized certain privileges that I have. I was talking to my daughter about, she's ever pulled over by the police, just keep driving and go to go a couple miles to a safe part of town where you think it's appropriate, and then get out of the car. And then she said, she thought about that some months or I don't know, years later, whether or not a black family could have had that same conversation to their black son, to just keep driving and pull over when you feel it's safe. I saw someone comment, a guy who went to Florida State, I went to Florida State Law, and the guy who graduated from the top of my class, a black guy, Haitian gentleman, and he graduated and went on to clerk for a federal district judge, which is a very prominent position. And this guy said when he was in Orlando, he was pulled over when he had his parents in the car with him. He was in a rental car. And he literally tried to do what my colleague was suggesting. He literally drove just, I think, maybe a few hundred yards up the road and pulled over into a well-lit area. But then he was approached by officers from all around his car with guns drawn, telling him to get on the floor. And he had to yell out and just say, listen, I'm a law student, I'm a law student. That way, use the lawyer card. At that point, that was the only thing he knew to do, right? But it worked. And when they came up to him and they said, oh, we stopped you for, your tag was expired or something. So what he did was he picked up the phone and called over to the rental company, and they said that was BS. And then when he told the officers that they had nothing to say, they just got in their cars and they left. So these are problems that we see every single day, and one of the solutions is that people speak up when they see these type of things, right? And if black people are the only ones speaking up when they see this, I don't think, 13% of the population, we're going to have an effect, but it's a bigger statement when we can, or when we have a solidified, when we have a group of people, white, black, Asian, Hispanic, all identifying racism when they see it and injustice when they see it, and not being silent. On these issues. So when you look at your friends and your colleagues on your Facebook platforms, on Instagram, and they're commenting when Colin Kaepernick is kneeling down, but they're not commenting when someone like George Floyd has a knee on him and then is killed, that's a problem. And if you have to call those people out, and if they're really friends of yours, they should really identify and they should acknowledge the injustices and the inequities that they see. And I think that's one of the solutions that will get us on the right trajectory.
So I have a slightly different take on it. And,
this is my more radical take.
Right, yeah, exactly. So basically, I think we're spending too much time searching for people to understand what we're going through in America and allies. I think allies are extremely important. During the protests, as you can see, one of the narratives that I don't think is being talked about enough is how diverse these protests are. Actually, the majority of the protests, I was at the Miami protest yesterday, and the majority of folks protesting were non-black, believe it or not. And so that to me indicates...
I even at the risk of sounding simplistic, repeat that.
The majority of folks that were protesting in Miami were non-black.
Because somehow, correct me if I'm wrong, George Floyd's girlfriend is, I think she's white?
She is Caucasian.
She is Caucasian. Thank you, Kevin. Kevin is my co-host this evening, but we had so many technical problems that we had to take care of doing that. So it brings to mind, because some people, and like I said, that guy had called me, had texted. I actually had to have him deleted from one of the groups because he's trying, and some of the things he was saying was very racist. But one of the things he said to me was his girlfriend was white. But then again, we don't know that. And when the cops held him down, you know what I mean? We don't know that. So it's still a racist thing, because even though he may have a white girlfriend, or wife for that matter, at the point in time, nobody sees that. So to camouflage it, to say, well, okay, it's not racism because his girlfriend is white. The fact of the matter, she wasn't there.
You can't entertain it. That's nothing very. I would have just ignored that one, but but basically, it was actually, it felt good to have other people marching on our behalf who were protesting peacefully. The majority of them, they were equally outraged by the injustice that was done to this gentleman, George Floyd, and other black men, and they see exactly what we see, and I appreciate that. Mm-hmm. However, I don't want to spend a whole lot of energy calling out people who aren't supporting. Listen, I think we need to focus more on what we can do to change our circumstances. I think at the end of the day, we've tried to appease, quote unquote, the oppressor, right, or folks who are doing the oppressing, and tell them that we're humans as well. But I think, and I know, America only responds to power and leverage, and I think as a people we need to talk about what we can do to support one another and embrace allies as they come in. But I don't think our focus should be on convincing people that America's racist. If you don't see it by now, that's on you. I'm not going to sit here and split it. I'm not going to focus my energy on convincing you. I'm going to focus my energy on fixing the problem, and anybody that recognizes it and you want to help, please help. But I'm not going to call people out who aren't supporting me. I don't care at this point. Well, what I care about is the people who are already involved, who are supporting, who I need to rally together to affect change. And one of the things that I want to also focus on is having a clear agenda. I think one of the issues with these protests that are going on, we need to figure out what our ask is, and that's not clear just yet, right?
And that's a problem. Sorry to interject, but that's a problem for me, because if you're going to burn a business that you have no notion, probably who owns it, but just that it's in the vicinity of where you're protesting, what's your asking at all? You know what I mean? And so, because part of the problem I'm having, and part of the problem I believe that people generally are having, is that these protests, while they make sense, that some of these things that we're doing, burning down buildings, burning down police stations, we're burning down a car drove through, and just because a person's probably trying to get to work, you're going to burn that car, set it aflame. You are pretty much telling other people that they don't like protests, they don't like, and so this is why, and then other folks play up that aspect. So I'm agreeing with you. I'm just bringing that to say that I'm agreeing with you with the fact that we need to have an agenda, and based on that agenda are protests. And guys, you're all legalists. Tell me if I'm wrong in terms of, based on that, moving forward, we need to know what the shape or the look of these protests are, because quite often I do believe there are segments of our population who are they're like excitement.
Then I got to push back on that. I mean,
okay,
because they said the same thing about the protests in the 80s. They said the same thing about the protests in the 70s, 60s. This is the same narrative. Everything you said for verbatim was said a decade earlier. But without those protests, I wouldn't be here. Those black cops wouldn't be there. Who are black cops. Harold would not be able to run for state attorney. We had no representation until we started agitating in the streets.
But I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm saying that to me, I have to burn. For example, if we have a protest in this place and you burn my business,
that's not.
Don't tell me it's casualty of war.
That's not helpful. But let me be clear. Let's look at the Arab Spring, right? People forget the Arab Spring started with a gentleman in Tunisia lighting himself on fire. That was self-destructive, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Not, but it was effective, meaning that it embraced the helplessness of an entire people. He was so fed up with it that he lit himself up on fire, and that led to an entire region of our world flipping injustice. What I'm saying is, yes, it's ineffective to loot your own businesses and whatnot, but it's hard to explain to people to be rational when they're tired of being killed on the streets and having injustice, and they try to go the traditional channels. people are mad now, and so I don't want to focus so much on who's looting and what. I want to focus on the fact that George Floyd was killed, okay, and we all know that nothing's going to happen. Or at least the appropriate justice is not going to happen, and we already see it happening, and we're tired of the okie doke. We're tired of the same script, and people are just spontaneously combusting at this point, and we need to, as leaders, figure out how to harness that anger and direct it into an agenda. Right? Instead of critiquing it and criticizing it, I think we should spend more time into developing it and molding it into a force that can be used for change. Okay? Because I don't want to sit here and criticize people who are angry and who are tired of the injustice, who are going out there. And there's a fraction of them who are there for their own interests, but by and large, the majority of folks who are protesting are rebelling against an unjust system. And I think us even talking about the whole looting and all of that stuff, it feeds into that other narrative, because at the end of the day, they're not going to listen to us until there's leverage, until there's power, until they're uncomfortable. And that's how change has traditionally happened. And people forget that MLK, when he was doing his peaceful protests, he was provoking those cops to beating them up, because he knew that America was in the midst of a Cold War, and that America would have to respond to that leverage, because they couldn't go until other countries side with the Americans over the Russians when they're beating black people in the streets. And so he used power, he used leverage, and he used it in a way that was nonviolent, but it was still effective because it was power. And at the end of the day, you have to use power.
And the leverage, so we can agree to disagree in terms of that, what kind of leverage. I see Harold is actually like itching to say something, so I'm going to turn it over to you now.
I actually agree with both of you, which is great. And it goes back to my point earlier, right? It goes back to the quote by Dr. Martin Luther King. Protesting, looting is the language of the unheard or the unseen, right? So let's go to the next step. We have a demographic of people who have traditionally been unheard and unseen in every aspect of American life. Health, criminal justice, economically, education. Have been unheard, ignored across the board. And so then you go to the next step. You have incidences like these. George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Trayvon Martin, Breonna Taylor, Sandra Bland. You have all these issues, a culmination of these issues, and then so you have a demographic of people that we go out and we protest, right? And so I equate it to mourning. I equate it to you lose a loved one. People rarely, if ever, kind of criticize a person. Oh, well, Harold, you're crying too damn much. Or, Harold, you're hooping and hollering too much. You know, oh, someone died. You know, no one really criticizes the phase where you're grieving, right? I equate the actions of our people, the people in our communities, to grieving. We're grieving a wretched condition in this country that has plagued us for generations and generations. So let's move away from criticizing the way and means that we choose to protest, which I do agree there's some situations where we're looting our own neighborhoods, our own businesses, right? But let's not pay attention to that. Let's pay attention to the condition that got us here and why we're acting this way. We have a system, or a culmination of systems, the education system, the criminal justice system, the economical system that we have in this country traditionally that's not served us, and that consistently
that's right.
And so now, to answer Dr. Ashby's question on that is, now it's time for us to get leaders in place who can lead and who can actually push forward that agenda.
Let me punch that just now. Is there, even in Broward County, still an existence of the good old boy club?
Yes.
Of course.
Anywhere.
And I'm asking that
In this country? Yes.
because for example, what I've noticed in a lot of and again, this is not about elections or picking sides or what have you, but they've been traditionally in a lot of these seats.
Yeah.
There have been guys who have been sitting there forever Deborah, I think you're probably running in one of those seats.
Yeah. So the seat that I'm running for, he's not seeking re-election, but he is probably the longest serving district attorney, prosecutor in the whole United States. He's been in the same office for 43 years.
Wow. So then,
And Broward County system is one of the worst. If you're a young black man and you get arrested in Broward County, good luck.
so essentially, what you hear from these guys, now I can use the term, folks, young, give to them back. Now I can use that term, young, give to them back. Is so to understand that there is probably a chance that what's been happening is showing there is time for a change. Essentially, there's time for a change. Whoever you choose to vote for, that's your prerogative. But sometimes when you sit in a position long enough, your perspective is tunnel vision based on what you know. At this time, we're running a little bit over, and that's understandable. There's nobody coming to make us that come after us. But what I'd like to do is some closing comments. I'm going to start with Josiah.
Sure. I think one thing we didn't touch on is what people can do when they experience police brutality. You know, you'd be surprised by how many people do not report to police officers.
Let me interject, folks. Josiah is actually a wrongful death and probably injury lawyer. So what he's telling you here right now is something you better listen up to, and I suggest just look straight across in the camera and let them know exactly what needs to be understood. Go ahead.
So you should absolutely report to the police department. And
So let me back up. I'm sorry to be interjecting, but you get stopped by a law enforcement person or anyone for that matter, because this is not again about officers. I have a wonderful relationship with the city of Sunrise. Chief Rosa, I have Constant Stanley from Lauderhill, wonderful. Hey Chief, how you doing? But we want to just make sure that black men, at the end of the day, and Chief Stanley is actually black also. So we just want to talk about young black men who are able to go home every day. Take me through what your procedures that you suggest that we need to do. You get pulled over.
Oh, sure. That's simple. So you're pulled over. Number one, you should know your rights. Know what you have to do and know what you do not have to do. So number one, an officer, let's say he suspects you of committing a crime. The first question you should ask is, am I being detained? If so, okay. If you're underage, I would like to speak with my mother. I would like my mother or my father present. I would like an attorney present. If you're being detained and they're questioning you, you do not have to answer any questions. You have a Fifth Amendment right under the Constitution to not speak, to not answer any single question that an officer is asking you. But what I was saying was a little bit different. If an officer is treating you in some way that is unprofessional, you should report that officer. And the reason why I say that is because you know the officer who was accused of kneeling on George Floyd's neck, he has a whole bunch of complaints. I think
He was accused of killing George Floyd.
Excuse me, killing George Floyd. And we all know he killed George Floyd. This officer who did that has a history of 18 complaints. And I guarantee you that is just the tip of the iceberg. I guarantee you there's hundreds of people who have experienced
But never complain.
right? And then you only have 18, and I haven't looked into what those complaints were of. I know some were excessive force, some were officer-involved shootings. But if you have a whole history of people complaining, you're more like that person is more likely to be held accountable. So if you just brush it off and say, you go tell your friends, your homeboys what happened, and you don't go complain, and then the internal affairs is not investigating, they're not aware, and that they're not on notice of this person who is pretty much a liability to the office now. So you should definitely report that officer.
Of course, part of that comes from not seeing anything being done about it after reporting.
Absolutely, 100%, 100%. But and I agree with that 100%. There is the saying that what's the benefit? What's the point of reporting? But the point of it is, let's say you're reporting this officer, right? And then somebody comes through like George Floyd, and unfortunately he was killed by this officer. It shows a history now. Now you have a history of 100 people complaining, and this person now can come seek justice from someone like me who does personal injury, wrongful death, You know, you can sue the police department. You can sue the EMS who failed to render aid in an appropriate manner. And you have a basis, at least you have some type of foundation to lean on now that you can point to.
Right.
As opposed to someone who's never been complained of. All he's received is recommendations and commendations from his superior officers that he's been doing a fantastic job. You know, and that's all that's on his track record. So I would definitely encourage people, if you feel that you're being a target of racism, some type of injustice, some type of discrimination, to go down to the local precinct, fill out a police report, or excuse me, fill out a report, and that's going to be on his file. That can't go anywhere. So that sticks with him. So that's one.
That's a tool that we underuse.
You see what I'm saying? That's one tool that a lot of people don't use.
Because it may not be for you, because like you said,
it may not benefit you individually in that particular
the next
instance,
person that he
but it may
does.
benefit someone else because it definitely will stick on that person's record.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's important. I never thought about it like that.
Since you're up, your closing comments.
So basically, I hope I was able to make the connection between the criminal justice system and the healthcare system and the underlying current of racism. Because at the end of the day, the same reason why George Floyd was killed and then he was not resuscitated or provided any care was because his black life did not matter. And when we say Black Lives Matter, it doesn't just apply to the criminal justice system, it applies to the healthcare system, it applies to the education system. And we need to understand that if they had cameras in hospitals, if they had body cams in hospitals, it would be a much bigger issue, meaning that the quote-unquote healthcare disparity would be a much bigger issue. So at the end of the day, okay. So at the end of the day, I definitely think that the police get a bad rap, and the level of police brutality that we see on these cameras, body cams, and people's home cameras is something that we definitely need to address. But just because it isn't in your face doesn't mean that it doesn't exist.
Right.
And so we need to make sure that when we ask for change, we don't just focus on what's in our face. We need to actually do the scholarly work and understand that this is a common thread that permeates healthcare, education, socioeconomics, so on and so forth. And we really need to address the issue of racism in our country.
Okay. Kevin was supposed to be our riding shotgun, is supposed to be our co-host. We got some technical problems. And so once again, this is Bar Talk on Jamaicans.com. And so we're going to close that with two things. We're going to go to Kevin, and then we're going to go right back to Attorney Pryor to give us our final thoughts.
All right. First of all, I want to thank you, gentlemen, for coming and sharing with us. Now, I of course, have a bunch of concerns. I have a bunch of questions, things regarding things like positional asphyxiation. When in the little glitch, we were talking about it a little bit.
Yeah.
There are things that need to be addressed like that. There are several other legal issues surrounding wrongfully incarcerated, wrongfully killed, representation, all of these issues that need to definitely be addressed. And unfortunately, in this 1 hour, there's not enough time to address all that, especially with all the glitches that we had this evening. But thank you guys for shedding some light, because this is the conversation that we need to have. This is the dialogue we need, because we're not conning anybody. This is the dialogue we need to have constantly. We don't need to just look at one aspect of it. We need to look at all aspects of it, because seeing George Floyd get killed is just a piece of everything that is happening. And if we don't have people speaking up and stepping up and standing up, then it will just end up way back into the 1800s, back into the slavery days. And nobody cares about the black people, the brown people, the people who they came and saw here, even if you want to go as far as the pilgrims. So there's a lot to be talked about, and there's a lot to be fought for. But fighting the wrong way doesn't make it. And we really need to do better with doing our fight.
All right. Appreciate that much. And so, of course, we're just going to have Attorney Pryor Jr. to close out, and I'll probably have a last couple of remarks, but just take it from here. Watch his face, folks. He ain't going away. Go ahead.
Thank you first and foremost for having us, sharing your platform with us, and us having this discussion and talk about the issues that are affecting our communities, not just here in Florida, Broward County, but throughout the world. Because if we're hurting here, you're hurting in Jamaica, you're hurting in Africa, you're hurting in China, you're hurting in London. And so I want to make this plea to you. I want to say this to all of those that are watching this. I'm a black man in America. I grew up in America my whole life. I have several generations that were here, family members that built this country. This country was built on their backs. And it hurts to grow up in a country that you have a certain allegiance to, and you see countless instances like George Floyd's, Breonna Taylor's, and many others that happen in this country, and we see the reckless disregard for black lives. I want to say to everyone out there that we're going to continue to fight. Young people like myself, Dr. Ashby, Dr. Josiah Graham, we're going to continue to fight. We're going to continue to work to not just elevate our careers and our personal net worths or our profiles, but elevate the culture, elevate all people of African diaspora. And I want to tell you that I'm running for office here in Broward County. I'm running to be the first African American state attorney in the history of Broward County, and we're ready to We need your support. So all of you, please go to my website. Visit my website, www.haroldpryor.com. You can learn more about me. You can learn more about why I want to change the criminal justice system. I'm running to initiate ground-level criminal justice reform while not compromising the safety of our communities. It doesn't matter your walk of life, where you're from, your race, religion, color, or creed. We all want safer communities, but we also want to ensure that we combat this system that has been traditionally stacked against people of color and poor people. So I ask each and every one of you to please exercise empathy, exercise compassion, because I think that right there is missing in all these instances, and that's to our white brothers and sisters out there. We have to reinstate empathy and compassion in our daily lives and our daily walks and lives. And if we do that, there will be no more Trayvon Martins. There will be no more George Zimmermans, because he could see that young man as his brother, as his cousin, as his nephew or his son.
Right.
Or those officers could see George Floyd as a brother or a cousin, and they just don't see race. Or those two men in Brunswick, Georgia could look at Ahmaud Arbery running down the street as just another young kid going for a Sunday afternoon job. If we reinstate compassion and empathy towards one another and look at each other as members of the human race, I truly believe that we can combat this wretched condition, this disease we call racism. So my name is Harold Pryor. Thank you, and I enjoyed my time on this platform. And once again, learn more about me at www.haroldpryor.com. Let's make history, not only in Broward County, but let's make history throughout the world.
And guess what, folks? Thank you, Harold. Here's the deal. I initially planned this as Young, Gifted, and Black. And while we do not promote companies, or we don't do anything like that directly, I'm just happy that we have young black men. It's a hope. It's folks, it's the hope for our future, the young black men. So I don't know if we got into tell what these brothers do on a 9-to-5 day. I'm going to switch back to Harold real quick to ask him something fun. Just say it, and then I'm going to go to Dr. Ashby and let him talk about his practice real quick. When you're not fighting everything else, what do you like to do?
It's funny. Before I was a big
one paragraph.
Football, it's sports, anything related to basketball, golf. But now it's just spending time with my wife and my 2-year-old son.
Nice. So black men we do have wives, we do have kids.
Yeah.
Dr. Ashby, like I said, we don't do cheap promos, but I need people to understand that our young brothers are going somewhere. Talk to the folks, tell them what you do before we close out.
Yes, I neglected to say that I'm a vascular cardiologist, So basically, I am a glorified plumber of the heart and blood vessels. And so if you have any concern that you have any heart or blood vessel issues, come see me. If you're focused on prevention, basically if you're concerned that you may develop it in the future, come see me because prevention is key. My business is Comprehensive Vascular Care. You can find us at cdcmedicine.com. And you can book an appointment. We do telemedicine as well. And the phone number is 305-432-4218. I have an office in South Miami, and I will, again, open up an office in Port St. Lucie. So pull up on me. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And before I conclude, let's get to Isaiah. Josiah. I'm sorry.
Jamaica.
That's part of the Jamaican thing that is going on. Hey, listen, like I said, it's Young, Gifted, and Black, so we're closing out with brothers. Like I said before, this is the hope, folks. This is the hope for what we do and what we ought to do well by making sure we celebrate the brothers who are around town doing things in a big way that represent us, because guess what? They are our future. All right? Take it away.
So yeah, my name is Josiah Graham. I do wrongful death, personal injury, negligent security, and medical malpractice. To sum it up, what happens is if someone is injured in a car accident and they're seriously injured, have a broken bone, or lose a limb, or someone is killed in a car crash, my firm, Kelly Ustall, we handle those cases. If someone is negligent in the hospital, and because of that negligence, someone suffers some type of serious condition, goes blind, someone loses a leg, someone has a artery removed, someone has some type of organ removed, we handle those cases. I also handle negligent security. So what does that mean? Let's say you go into a bar or a club and someone else is able to get in there with some type of weapon because the club owner was negligent in not providing adequate security to prevent them from coming in, and someone is shot or killed. Or someone lives in an apartment complex that is run down, somewhere in Liberty City, somewhere in Lauderdale, and someone is killed there. We represent those families. So that's what I do. When I'm not doing that, I'm spending time with my fiance Donna. We're getting married.
Oh,
And she's not Jamaican, but she's Caribbean. She's from Grenada. And
look at him.
right now we're just house shopping, and that's what I do for fun now. Go on Realtor.com or Zillow and just look for different
Or
properties.
find one of our local realtors.
We know a few who can hook you up with. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Awesome, folks. I know we took a little bit more time, but I want to do two things. I want to really thank you, honestly thank you for staying with us through all some of those little technical and audio and echo differences. We heard it all. I was not able to respond to all of you. I'll go back and I will respond to you individually. I just want to, first of all, thank our crew that was here today, and just the fact that we were able to go through, and with all the issues, they stand in, you stand in, and that's almost a simile of or an example of how we should be doing things. So I really want to first of all thank Attorney Josiah Graham for actually coming out and taking time out of today. I want to talk also Dr. Bernard Ashby for sharing. As you guys know, Dale Holness, Mayor Dale VC Holness should have been here, and possibly our police chief, but they had things to do on the front line, and so we just give them thanks. But we had a young man, like I say, young, gifted, and black, who held the fort. So we just want to give shout out to our brother, Attorney Harold F. Pryor Jr. for just helping to anchor things and making it happen. Folks, what you see here this evening, we've got a lot of information. We got a lot of information from them, and we just need to understand that the future is invested in our brothers. If you see a brother by the wayside, take time to talk to him. Don't let him do anything foolish, but also enlighten him as to what we need to be doing so we can move to the next level. some of the things we heard this evening is that regardless of what, you need to learn to exercise your vote. You need to go to vote. You need to understand your rights. You need to not just go carelessly and do things. We could have exhausted so many ways, but we really thank you for at least staying with us through what was kind of a technical, difficult thing, but we made it happen. I want to thank my co-host today, who could not co-host too much, Kevin Stew from the Night Shift with Kevin Stew. Kevin Stew and the Night Shift. I keep mixing it up. So
KevinStew.com.
KevinStew.com for making it happen today. We thank you so much. Thank you for bearing with us. God bless. See you next week.